She built a $1 billion empire from a wheelchair, then watched a man she trusted turn it into a weapon against her. Victoria Whitmore sat trapped in a luxury restaurant surrounded by hired threats, and not one person in that room moved to help her. Power, wealth, intelligence, none of it mattered in that moment. But the quiet man in the corner? He noticed. He always noticed. If you've never seen someone lose everything in a single evening, stay with me, because this story will shake you. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The reservation had been made under a different name. That was the first thing Victoria noticed when the maitre d' led her through the main floor of Ardent, past the white tablecloths and the soft string quartet and the kind of candlelight that made wealthy people feel like the world was gentle. The reservation wasn't under her name or her assistant's. It was under the name of a shell company she recognized from an internal financial memo she'd received 3 weeks ago and flagged as suspicious. She hadn't said anything about it to Marcus yet. She'd wanted to confirm it first. Now, being wheeled through the restaurant by her personal aide, Diane, Victoria felt the first cold thread of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Caution. She was 30 years old and had run Whitmore Technologies for 6 years. She had negotiated contracts with defense ministries, sat across from venture capitalists who thought her paralysis made her weak, rebuilt the company after her father's death, while grieving and barely sleeping. She was not easily rattled, but the reservation name sat in her chest like a splinter, small and wrong, and she couldn't stop pressing on it. "He's already here," Diane said quietly, nodding toward the private dining alcove at the far end of the restaurant. Marcus Vale was seated with his back to the wall, the way he always sat, always positioning himself to see everything first. He was 52, silver at the temples, and he wore his suits the way some men wore armor. He'd been her father's partner before he became hers. She had trusted him with things she hadn't trusted anyone else: budget projections, legal vulnerabilities, the family history she'd never shared publicly. She'd trusted him with too much. She understood that now. "I'll take it from here," Victoria said. Victoria. "I'm fine, Diane. Wait by the bar." Diane hesitated. She was 38 and had worked for Victoria for 4 years, and she knew when not to argue. She stepped back, and Victoria wheeled herself the rest of the way to the alcove alone. Marcus stood when she arrived. He always did. It was one of his habits, that old-fashioned kind of courtesy that made you think he was trustworthy. "Victoria." He smiled. "You look well." "Sit down, Marcus." He sat. His smile didn't change. The alcove was semi-private, separated from the main dining room by a low partition and a curtain that had been drawn halfway. Victoria noticed that the 2 tables closest to the alcove were occupied. Men in expensive casual clothes, the kind that were meant to look unremarkable but cost more than most people's rent. 3 at one table, 2 at another. None of them were eating. All of them were watching their phones or talking to each other in the careful, low way of people who were waiting for something. Victoria set her hands flat on the table. "I found the Meridian accounts," she said. Marcus picked up his wine glass. "I assumed you would, eventually. You've been routing money through 3 subsidiaries I didn't know existed. 2 of them were incorporated under my signature. Signatures that were forged." She kept her voice level. "You've been using my company to move money for people I don't want to know about." "That's a significant allegation. I have the internal audits. I have the wire transfer logs. I have 3 years of documentation." She leaned forward slightly. "I want you to explain to me why I shouldn't hand all of it to the SEC by Monday morning." Marcus set his wine glass down. He looked at her for a moment, not the way he used to look at her with that calculated warmth, but with something that was closer to what he actually was. "Because," he said, "those documents don't say what you think they say. I've had 2 independent forensic accountants review them. Then they missed things." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a manila envelope on the table between them. Or perhaps they didn't miss things. Perhaps they were instructed to find certain things and ignore others. Victoria didn't touch the envelope. "What is that?" Evidence, Marcus said, that you've been aware of the Meridian accounts for 18 months, that you authorized 2 of the transfers personally, that the offshore routing was your idea, not mine. The silence between them was the kind that had weight. That's fabricated, Victoria said. It's thorough, Marcus replied. There's a difference. He tilted his head. The SEC won't be getting your documents on Monday, Victoria, but they will be getting mine, unless we come to an arrangement tonight. An arrangement. A transfer of operational control, temporary on paper, enough to give me the legal standing I need and enough time for this situation to resolve itself quietly. He pushed the envelope slightly toward her. There's a document inside. It requires your signature. Victoria looked at the envelope. She looked at the men at the surrounding tables, who had all, in the last 60 seconds, subtly oriented themselves toward the alcove. She looked at the curtain, which had been drawn a little further now, cutting off her sight line to the rest of the restaurant. She thought about Diane at the bar, about her phone, which she'd already noticed had no signal in this corner of the room, about the fact that the maitre d' who had seated her was no longer visible anywhere. You planned this, she said. Not a question. I've been planning it for 2 years, Marcus said. He wasn't gloating. He said it the way someone states a logistical fact. You're very intelligent, Victoria, but intelligence isn't the same as power. You've always confused the two. Across the restaurant, in a corner booth near the kitchen hallway, a man named Ethan Cross was trying to get his daughter on the phone. He'd been at Ardent for 40 minutes, waiting on a client who hadn't shown. The client was a property management company that had a recurring HVAC issue in one of their downtown buildings, and Ethan had driven 40 minutes in traffic to discuss a service contract that would have kept his small repair business afloat through the winter. The client had texted 20 minutes ago. Something came up. Can we reschedule? Ethan had stared at that text for a while. Then he'd ordered a coffee and a bowl of soup because he'd already parked and he wasn't going to let the evening be a complete waste. He was 37 years old, and he looked it, not in a broken way, but in the way of someone who had done physical work his whole life and who didn't spend much time in front of mirrors. He had a repair company's logo on his jacket, a 3-inch scar along his left forearm that most people didn't ask about, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent years in environments where stillness kept you alive. He'd left that life behind, more or less. His daughter, Maya, was 9 and currently staying with his neighbor, Mrs. Pelham, who watched her on evenings when Ethan had to work late. Maya should have been in bed by now. She wasn't answering her phone, which either meant she was asleep or she was watching something on her tablet with her headphones in and ignoring him. Both were plausible. He sent a text. Call me when you see this. I'm heading home soon, and set his phone down. That was when he noticed the curtain. It wasn't the curtain itself. It was the way it moved. Someone had drawn it further closed, and through the gap at the bottom, Ethan could see the feet of chairs, the legs of a table, and the unmistakable outline of a wheelchair. He noticed other things too. The 2 tables flanking the alcove, where the men weren't eating and weren't really talking. The way one of them kept his right hand in his lap rather than on the table. The maitre d' who had disappeared. The woman at the bar. Youngish, professional, phone in her hand, who kept glancing toward the alcove with the tight expression of someone trying to decide whether to act. Ethan finished his soup. He watched for another 2 minutes. Then he stood up, picked up his coffee cup, and walked toward the alcove like a man looking for the restroom. I'm not signing anything, Victoria said. Marcus exhaled. It was the exhale of a man who'd expected this. Victoria, you can take your envelope and your fabricated documents and your hired men in the bad suits, and you can lower your voice. Go to whoever you think is going to believe you over me, and we'll see how that conversation goes. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. Her hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. I have been running that company since I was 24 years old. I rebuilt it after my father died. I turned it into something that matters. You think I'm going to hand it to you because you put some men at the tables next to me? The men aren't here to intimidate you, Marcus said. They're here to ensure this conversation stays private. He paused. And to make sure you don't leave before we've reached an understanding. That landed. Victoria looked at the curtain again. At the men. at the clear reality that she was in a wheelchair in a private alcove of a restaurant with no phone signal and no clear path to the exit. She had faced a lot in her life. The accident at 22 that had taken the use of her legs and given her 6 months of rehabilitation and a year of quietly stitching herself back together. Her father's death. The board members who had voted against her in her first year because they thought her disability was a liability. She had faced all of it without flinching, or at least without showing it. But this was different. This was enclosed and physical and immediate, and she felt the walls of it in a way that made the accident feel distant by comparison. She was reaching for her phone. Useless, she knew, but reaching for it anyway, when the curtain moved. The man who pushed through it wasn't large in any theatrical way. He was average height, lean, wearing a jacket with a logo on the chest. He was holding a coffee cup, and he looked for all the world like someone who'd taken a wrong turn looking for the men's room. "Sorry," he said, glancing around the alcove. "Thought this was the way to—" He stopped. His eyes moved from Victoria to Marcus to the envelope on the table, and something in his expression went very quiet. "My mistake." "This area is private," Marcus said. "Yeah, I can see that." The man didn't move. His eyes settled on Victoria for a moment. Not the way people usually looked at her, not with pity or with the particular discomfort that her wheelchair sometimes triggered in strangers. He looked at her the way someone looks when they're reading a situation and they've already reached a conclusion. "You okay?" Victoria opened her mouth. "She's fine," Marcus said. "Please leave." The man set his coffee cup on the edge of the nearest empty table. "I wasn't asking you." One of the men from the flanking tables was already standing. He was built like someone who'd spent years making himself look like a threat, and he crossed the distance to the alcove entrance with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this before. "Sir," he said, "you need to—" What happened next was not cinematic. It was not slow or elegant or particularly dramatic. The standing man reached for the newcomer's arm, and the newcomer moved. A single, compact shift that redirected the grab, used the man's own momentum, and deposited him against the low partition with a sound like a bag of grain hitting a floor. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. The restaurant noise continued. The string quartet kept playing. 3 tables away, an older couple kept talking over their appetizers without looking up. The 4 remaining men were all standing now. The newcomer straightened his jacket. He looked at Victoria. "I'm going to need you to stay close to me," he said. His voice was calm. Not the kind of calm that came from confidence, the kind that came from having been calm in much worse places than this. "Can you move your chair quickly?" Victoria's heart was hammering. "Yes." "Then we're going to the back." "Wait!" Marcus's voice cracked with the first real edge of anger. "You don't know what you're walking into." The man looked at him, just looked at him. "Neither do you," he said. What followed was 3 minutes of controlled chaos. Ethan Cross moved through the restaurant the way water moves, finding the path of least resistance, neutralizing what couldn't be avoided. One of Marcus's men tried to cut off the route to the kitchen hallway and found himself sitting on the floor with no clear understanding of how he'd gotten there. Another tried a different angle and discovered that the quiet repair technician from the corner table had reflexes that didn't belong to someone who fixed HVAC units for a living. Victoria pushed her chair as fast as she could manage, which was faster than most people expected. She'd been in this chair for 8 years. She knew how to move in it. Diane saw them coming from 30 feet away and was already on her feet, already scanning for exits. "Kitchen," Ethan said as he came alongside Victoria. "Then the service exit. You have a car?" "My driver's outside," Victoria said. "South entrance." "Not anymore. They'll have someone on your car." He pushed through the kitchen door without slowing. A line cook looked up. Ethan said, "Sorry, emergency," with such ordinary authority that the cook just pointed toward the back. They came out into the alley behind the restaurant. Cold air, wet pavement, the sound of traffic 1 block over. Ethan looked right, then left. "This way." "The files," Victoria said. She stopped her chair. "Marcus has a folder. Documents that can be used against me. He had it at the table. If he keeps those, we need to move first. You don't understand." Her voice was sharp, but not with anger, with the particular desperation of someone who can see the shape of what's about to happen to them. Those documents aren't just leverage. He's going to use them. He's going to go to the board, to the SEC. He's going to file them before we can counter them, and I won't be able to... Hey. Ethan's voice was quiet. He crouched down slightly so he wasn't talking over her. A small thing, but it stopped her mid-sentence. I know. We'll deal with it, but not here, not right now. Right now we go. She looked at him. The alley was dark and smelled like restaurant garbage and the residue of rain, and she was a billionaire CEO in a wheelchair in a back alley with a stranger who had just disarmed 4 men with his hands, and somehow the most disorienting part of the entire evening was the matter-of-fact way he was looking at her. Not like she needed saving, like she was a person who'd run into a problem and they were going to solve it together. Okay, she said. They moved. 3 blocks away, in a parking structure, they stopped long enough for Diane to call a car and for Ethan to make sure they hadn't been followed. He did this by standing at the structure entrance for 90 seconds, watching the street, in a way that was so thorough and so quiet that Victoria didn't interrupt it. You're not a repair technician, she said finally. I am, actually. He turned from the entrance. That's what I do now. What did you do before? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, just the pause of someone deciding how much context was necessary. Something else, he said. Diane's car was 8 minutes away. Victoria sat in the dim light of the parking structure and thought about the folder Marcus had left on the table. She had seen it, she'd looked right at it, and in the chaos of the exit, it was still sitting there. She thought about the board of directors, about the SEC, about the news cycle that would begin the moment Marcus filed whatever he had prepared. She thought about how long he'd said he'd been planning this. 2 years. He'd said it without flinching. 2 years ago, she had been at the height of her confidence. She had been making decisions about acquisitions, about international expansion, about the kind of future Whitmore Technologies was going to build. And underneath all of it, in the foundation she'd trusted without looking too closely, Marcus had been laying a different kind of plan entirely. My name is Victoria Whitmore, she said. She didn't know exactly why she said it, maybe because the evening had stripped away so much of the normal scaffolding of who she was, and she needed to say it out loud. I own Whitmore Technologies. Ethan nodded. I know who you are. Then you know what those files mean. If he releases them, then we make sure he doesn't get the chance. He sat down on the hood of a parked car, not quite looking at her, looking past her at the street, still tracking, still watching. You said you had documentation, the real kind. At the office, on a secured server. But if he moves fast enough, how fast can he move, Victoria thought. He'll need the board to convene an emergency session. That's 48 hours minimum with notice requirements. But if he's already briefed the SEC separately... She stopped. She pressed her hand flat against her thigh. A habit, a thing she'd done since the accident when she needed to think. He's been building this. Every piece of it. He's not going to wait. Then we don't either. Ethan finally looked at her directly. He had dark eyes, a little tired, the kind that had seen things and decided not to talk about them much. Who do you trust inside the company? 3 people, she said. Then, more honestly, 2. Maybe. That's enough. Is it? He didn't give her the reassuring answer. She appreciated that. I don't know yet, he said, but it's what we have. The car arrived. They loaded in, Diane in the front, Victoria and Ethan in the back, the city sliding past the windows in its indifferent way, lights and traffic, and all those lives moving forward in their ordinary grooves while hers had shifted into something she didn't have a name for yet. She looked at the man beside her. He was staring out the window, phone in his hand, checking something. What's your name? She asked. Ethan Cross, he said. He sent a text and put the phone away. And I need to call my babysitter before it gets too late. Victoria stared at him. I have a 9-year-old, he said, without any apparent irony. She worries. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside the car, 2 people who had been strangers 90 minutes ago sat with the knowledge that the night wasn't over, and that what Marcus Vale had started in that restaurant alcove was going to have to be finished somewhere else entirely. Neither of them knew yet how deep it went. The car dropped them at a hotel Diane booked under her own name, a mid-range place off the financial district, the kind with a lobby that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner, and a front desk staffed by someone too tired to ask questions. Not the kind of place Victoria Whitmore typically stayed. That was the point. Ethan had suggested it. Victoria had agreed without argument, which told him something about where her head was. People who'd just had the floor pulled out from under them either shut down or they got very practical, very fast. Victoria Whitmore, he was learning, did the second thing. The room was on the 4th floor. One bed, a pull-out sofa, a window that looked out onto the side of another building. Diane set Victoria's bag on the dresser and started charging her phone without being asked. Ethan stood near the door and called Mrs. Pelham. "She's fine," Mrs. Pelham said, before he could ask. "Asleep about an hour ago. Had 2 bowls of cereal for dinner, which I know isn't what you'd want, but she said you always let her." "I do sometimes," Ethan said. "Thanks, Carol. I'll pick her up by 8. "Don't rush." A pause. "You sound like something happened." "Just a long night. I'll explain tomorrow." He hung up and turned back to the room. Victoria had wheeled herself to the small desk in the corner and had her laptop open. She was typing with the focused speed of someone who had shifted entirely into damage control mode, her jaw set, her posture rigid in a way that probably hurt, but that she wasn't going to acknowledge. "I need to contact my head of legal," she said, without looking up, "and my CFO. I need them in a secure location before Marcus can reach them." "How much do you trust your CFO?" 70%. "That's not enough. It's what I have." She stopped typing for a second. "His name is Robert Chen. He's been with the company 8 years. He's not... I don't think he's involved. But Marcus has a way of getting to people before you realize he's gotten to them." Ethan pulled out the chair from the small table near the window and sat down. He'd been on his feet for 3 hours, and his left knee was doing the thing it did when he'd been moving fast. A low, grinding ache that he'd learned to ignore in his 30s the way he'd ignored other things in his 20s. He thought about the men in the restaurant. None of them had been serious operators, hired muscle, probably local, the kind of people Marcus would use for controlled intimidation rather than anything messier. That was good and bad. Good because it meant Marcus's first play was corporate, not violent. Bad because it meant he had other options available and had chosen not to use them yet. "Tell me about Marcus," Ethan said. Victoria kept typing. "What do you want to know?" "How long has he actually been in the company?" 26 years. He was my father's first business partner. They built the original company together before I was born." She paused. Hit a key hard. "When my father died, Marcus stayed. I assumed that meant something." "It did, just not what you thought." She looked up at that, not with anger, but with the expression of someone who was still in the process of absorbing a fact they already knew and hadn't finished processing. "He came to my hospital room," she said. "After the accident. He sat with me for 3 hours and he told me the company was going to be fine. That I was going to be fine." She looked back at the screen. "I don't know why I'm telling you that." "Because it's the part that makes the rest of it harder to carry," Ethan said. She didn't respond to that, but her typing slowed for a moment and then picked back up. Diane came back from the bathroom and looked at Ethan with the expression of a practical person who'd decided to trust him provisionally. "She needs to eat something," she said quietly. "She didn't have dinner." "Neither did I," Ethan said. "There anything open in the lobby?" "Vending machines." "Good enough." He went downstairs and came back with 2 bags of chips, a package of peanut butter crackers, and 3 bottles of water. He set them on the table without ceremony. Victoria glanced at the crackers and then, in the way of someone who hasn't eaten and doesn't want to admit it's affecting their thinking, picked up the package and opened it. "Talk me through the Meridian accounts," Ethan said. "Everything you know." She talked. He listened. He wasn't a financial expert. His background was tactical, operational, the kind of work where understanding complex systems meant understanding how they could be broken rather than how they were designed. But he was good at listening to the shape of things, at finding the points where the structure didn't hold, and as Victoria laid out what she'd discovered over the past 3 weeks, he started to see it. 3 subsidiaries, incorporated over 18 months. 2 carried Victoria's forged signatures. The money moving through them was significant. Not so large that it triggered automatic flags, but cumulative enough to matter. The routing pattern was sophisticated. Through 2 domestic accounts, then offshore, then back through a different subsidiary as what appeared to be consulting fees. Clean on the surface. The kind of thing that looked like aggressive tax management until someone pulled the thread hard enough. Who built the structure? Ethan asked. That kind of layering doesn't come from Marcus alone. He has a financial advisor, a man named Terrence Boyle. I've met him twice. He came to one of our board dinners. He runs a private equity consulting firm, but his background is structured finance. She set down the crackers. I didn't look into him at the time. I should have. How did Marcus get the forged signatures? He had access to my digital signature authentication for 18 months. There was a period, right after the accident during my recovery, when I temporarily gave him signing authority. He was supposed to use it for routine operational documents. She said this in a measured way, but Ethan heard the thing underneath it. The particular humiliation of realizing that your vulnerability had been used as a door. He must have retained a copy of the authorization protocol, long enough to build something that looked legitimate. Ethan was quiet for a moment. When were the accounts flagged in your internal audit? 3 weeks ago. My head of internal compliance, a woman named Sandra Lim, found a discrepancy in a quarterly reconciliation. She brought it to me directly, that was the right call. I told her to dig, but not to document anything until I understood what we were looking at. She looked at her hands. Marcus doesn't know about Sandra. I don't think he knows she found it. That's the first piece of good news tonight, Ethan said. It doesn't feel like good news. He still has those fabricated files. He's had months to build a counter-narrative, and She stopped. She pressed her palm against her thigh again, that gesture he'd noticed in the alley. I walked into that restaurant thinking I was going to confront him. I thought I had enough to back him into a corner. I didn't understand what I was walking into. He planned it for 2 years, Ethan said. You found it in 3 weeks. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's a difference in preparation time. That's a very kind way of saying I underestimated him. No, he said. It's an accurate way. There's a difference. She looked at him again. That same direct measuring look she'd given him in the alley, like she was trying to figure out what category he belonged to. He understood the impulse. He wasn't easy to categorize, which had been both an advantage and a problem throughout most of his adult life. Why did you help me? She asked. Ethan considered the question seriously. He'd asked himself a version of it during the walk to the parking structure, when the smarter thing would have been to call the police from a distance and stay out of it. Because I could, he said, and because no one else was going to. That's not a complete answer. No, he agreed, but it's an honest one. She held his gaze for a second and then nodded, once, and turned back to her laptop. I need to call Sandra, she said. She needs to secure the audit files tonight. Use Diane's phone, not yours. Victoria glanced at Diane, who was already holding it out. But Sandra Lim answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake. She was 29, meticulous, and had the voice of someone who ran on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee. Tight, alert, a little sharp at the edges. I was wondering when you'd call, Sandra said. I saw something on the financial wire about an hour ago. A source told Bloomberg that Whitmore Technologies is under informal SEC review. It's not published yet, but it's going to be. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. He moved fast. Who moved fast? What happened? I need you to pull the audit files off the internal server. All of them. The Meridian documentation, the reconciliation reports, the signature logs, everything you've compiled. Move them to the offline backup drive in my office, the gray one in the bottom left drawer, and then take the drive home with you tonight. Don't tell anyone. Silence for a moment. Victoria, are you somewhere safe? Yes. Are you sure? Sandra, the drive. Okay. She could hear Sandra moving, the sound of a chair, a door. The Bloomberg thing, is it fabricated? The documents that source provided to Bloomberg, yes. The underlying activity they're pointing at is real, but the attribution is wrong. That's what the audit shows. A pause. I need that drive. I'll have it in 20 minutes. Sandra's voice had shifted into the flat, concentrated register of someone who'd decided to be useful. Is there anything else? Not tonight. Go straight home after. She hung up and set Diane's phone on the desk. For a moment, she just sat there, and Ethan noticed the way her shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, but in the physical release of someone who'd been holding themselves rigid for too long. The SEC tip is already out, she said. I heard. If it hits the news cycle before morning, the board is going to convene without waiting for the notice period. They have emergency provisions. She rubbed the side of her face. I have 3 board members I trust completely. The other 5, I don't know. Marcus has had time to work them. Can you reach your 3 tonight? One of them, yes. The other 2 are traveling, different time zones. She reached for her phone, then remembered she wasn't supposed to use it. I need a clean phone. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and put a prepaid on the table. Victoria looked at it. You carry a burner phone. I carry a spare, he said, for practical reasons. What practical reasons does a repair technician have for carrying a spare phone? He looked at her steadily. Old habit. She picked up the phone. The call to her board member, a woman named Patricia Osai, who had been on the Whitmore board for 11 years and who Victoria had once heard describe Marcus Vail as professionally charming in the way that should make you nervous, lasted 12 minutes. Ethan listened to Victoria's side of it, which was enough. Patricia had already heard the Bloomberg rumor. She was alarmed and careful and asked the right questions, which told Ethan she was either genuinely loyal or very good at performing loyalty, and Victoria's expression during the call suggested she believed it was the first thing. When she hung up, she said, Patricia will hold the other 2 board members I trust. She can reach them before morning. Between the 3 of them, they can block an emergency session for at least 72 hours, maybe 90. That's a window, Ethan said. It's a narrow one. She looked at her hands again. They weren't shaking anymore, he noticed. Marcus will file the fabricated documents with the SEC through a third party, probably a law firm that has plausible deniability. Once they're in the system, even if we can prove they're fabricated, the investigation process takes months. The board loses confidence. The stock drops. Key people start looking for exits. She paused. I've seen him do it before. Not to me, to someone else. Ethan straightened. Who? A company called Arcturus Systems, 3 years ago. Their CEO was pushed out in a compliance scandal that looked overwhelming on paper. She looked up. He didn't do what they said. I knew it at the time, but I didn't understand the mechanism. Now I do. It's a pattern, Ethan said. Yes. Which means there's a trail. She went quiet for a moment. Then carefully, what do you mean? If he's done this before, there are people who know how he did it. The financial advisor, the law firm, the men he used at the restaurant tonight, none of those people are loyal out of conviction. They're loyal because it's profitable. And if the profit equation changes, he stopped. I need to make a call. Victoria watched him take out his own phone, his real one, and scroll to a number he hadn't called in a while. She could tell that from the way he looked at it for a second before pressing dial. The brief particular hesitation of reaching back toward something you've tried to leave behind. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, rough with sleep and something that wasn't quite surprise. Cross, it's past midnight. I know what time it is, Danny. Haven't heard from you in, 8 months? 9. I need something. A pause. The sound of movement, someone sitting up. What kind of something? Financial forensics, corporate fraud pattern. I need to know if a man named Marcus Vail has done this before, how he did it, and who helped him. And I need it fast. I'm talking 48 hours. Silence on the other end. Then, that's not nothing, Ethan. I know. This official? No. Another pause, longer. You in trouble? Someone else is. I'm adjacent. Adjacent, Danny repeated with the flat skepticism of someone who knew Ethan's history with adjacency. You're never adjacent. You're either in or you're out. You just tell yourself there's a middle ground. He exhaled. Send me what you have. I'll see what I can do. I owe you. You already owe me. This is more. The line went dead. Victoria was watching him when he put the phone down. Who was that? Someone I used to work with, Ethan said. He has access to financial intelligence networks, not the kind that are publicly available. Intelligence networks, she said slowly. As in government. As in people who track how money moves across borders, because how money moves across borders is often how you find out what people are planning to do. He met her eyes. Danny Reyes, former DIA. He's private sector now, but he still has contacts. Victoria absorbed this. The DIA, she said. Defense Intelligence Agency. Yes. And you knew him because I operated in environments where we needed each other's information. He said it simply, without elaboration. That's all I'm going to tell you tonight. She could have pushed. He could see her deciding not to. All right, she said. What does Danny need from us? Everything you have on Marcus, the subsidiary names, the dates, the account routing information you found in the audit, whatever you can put together in the next hour, while it's fresh and before we lose the thread. He glanced at Diane. Can you type fast? Diane looked mildly offended. I run this woman's life. Yes, I can type fast. Then you two compile it and I'll send it to Danny in a package. He starts pulling on the Arcturus Systems thread and anything else he can find. He looked at Victoria. And in the morning, we need to go back. She frowned. To the restaurant? No. To the evidence Marcus took from the table tonight. He paused. He had a folder. Whatever was in it, the fabricated documents, the forged authorizations, those are physical or digital files that came from somewhere. Someone printed them, compiled them, formatted them to look legitimate. That takes expertise, and that expertise leaves traces. You're going to find the source. I'm going to try. For the first time since the restaurant, Victoria's expression shifted into something that wasn't pure damage control, something that had an edge of forward momentum to it. Not optimism exactly, more like the recalibration of someone who'd been knocked down and was figuring out their footing again. There's something else, she said. The man who forged my signature on those subsidiary documents, he needed the original authorization protocol from my recovery period. That document was stored in the company's legal archive, restricted access. She met Ethan's eyes. Only 8 people have ever had clearance to that archive. So one of those 8 people either gave Marcus access or gave it to someone who did. Yes. Do you have the access logs? Sandra can pull them. Then that's the first concrete thread, Ethan said. Not the money, the document. Someone inside handed him the key, and that person left a record whether they knew it or not. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its late-night rhythms, distant traffic, the muffled bass of a bar somewhere down the block, the ordinary sounds of a world that didn't know or care about any of this. Diane opened a new document on her laptop and looked at Victoria. Start with the subsidiaries, she said, in order of creation date. Victoria turned to face the screen. Ethan refilled his water bottle from the bathroom tap and came back and sat down. And for the next hour and 20 minutes, they worked. 3 people in a mediocre hotel room, building the architecture of a defense out of documentation and memory, and the connections that Ethan was quietly, methodically beginning to activate. He texted Danny twice more with additional details as Victoria and Diane produced them. Danny responded once, briefly. Arcturus CEO still fighting his case. We'll contact him. Sit tight. At 2 a.m, Victoria stopped typing and sat back in her chair. Her neck was stiff. He could see it in the way she was holding herself, and she had the particular hollowness of someone running on adrenaline that was finally beginning to thin. You should sleep, he said. I won't. You should try. She looked at him. What about you? I'll stay up for a while. He nodded toward the pull-out sofa. I've slept in worse places. That's not something most people say. I'm not most people. She was quiet for a moment, then, your daughter, Maya. She said the name carefully, like she'd been holding on to it. How old did you say? 9. What does she think you do? For work? She thinks I fix things. He paused. Which I do. Just not always the kind of things she pictures. Victoria's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. the first non-controlled expression he'd seen from her all evening. She'd be surprised by tonight. She'd probably think it was cool, Ethan said. She watches a lot of action movies. I've told her they're unrealistic. Are they? He considered this seriously. The parts where the hero doesn't get hurt, yes. The parts where the stakes are real, those they mostly get right. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You got hurt tonight, she said. He thought she hadn't noticed. The way he'd been favoring his left side since the restaurant, where one of Marcus's men had landed a better hit than the others. He'd taken a shot to the ribs when his attention was on getting Victoria through the kitchen door. Nothing broken, probably. Bruised, certainly. I'm fine, he said. That's what people say when they're not going to admit the alternative. She held out her hand toward Diane without looking. First aid kit. Diane, apparently anticipating this, already had a small kit from her bag. She set it in Victoria's outstretched hand. I don't need, Ethan started. I know you don't need it, Victoria said, but you're going to let me do something useful because I've been sitting here for 2 hours being helped by people, and it is wearing on me in ways I cannot fully explain. She said it without self-pity and without apology, just direct and honest, the way people talk when they're too tired to manage their edges. So sit there and let me check your ribs. He sat. She rolled closer. Her hands were precise and careful, the touch of someone who knew the difference between checking for damage and treating a wound. He breathed through it when she pressed along his left side and found the bruised spot. Not broken, she said, more to herself than him. I know. You'd know differently if it was. She sat back. I was pre-med, before. She didn't elaborate on the before. She didn't have to. I know what broken ribs feel like, personally. The accident. The crash that had taken the use of her legs. He didn't ask about it. It wasn't his to ask. She taped some gauze against the bruising anyway, efficiently, and rolled back to her side of the room. You need ice. Hotel has a machine down the hall. I'll get some. You won't. Probably not, he admitted. She almost smiled again. Not quite. Tomorrow, she said, when this is over. It's not going to be over tomorrow. No, I know. She looked at her laptop screen, at the document they'd built together over the last hour. But when it is, I'd like to meet Maya. Ethan looked at her. It was such a specific and unexpected thing to say. Not thank you. Not I'll compensate you for your time. Not the professional courtesy of one person acknowledging a debt to another. Just that. A request to meet a 9-year-old girl who ate cereal for dinner and thought action movies were cool. She'd like that, he said. And meant it. Victoria nodded and turned back to her screen. Diane had curled up on the far side of the bed with her coat over her shoulders and was asleep within 5 minutes, the reliable unconsciousness of a person who'd learned to rest whenever the opportunity existed. The room settled into its night sounds. Ethan sat by the window, watching the street below out of habit, thinking through the shape of what Marcus Vale had built and where the weak points were. Thinking about Danny Reyes, who was somewhere right now pulling financial records and making calls to people who owed him favors. Thinking about the archive access logs that Sandra was going to pull in the morning. Thinking about a folder sitting on a restaurant table 2 miles away that contained the careful fabrication of an innocent person's guilt. He thought about the Arcturus CEO, some man whose name he didn't know yet, who'd spent 3 years trying to prove he hadn't done what he was accused of. Who'd maybe stopped believing it was possible. There were threads here. He was good at finding threads. He settled in and let the night pass over him and waited for morning. The way he'd waited for a lot of mornings in a lot of difficult places. Patiently, without illusion, with the particular discipline of a man who'd learned that the time between now and the next move was not wasted time. It was the time when you made sure you were ready. Danny Reyes called at 6:47 in the morning. Ethan was already awake. He'd slept maybe 2 hours on the pull-out sofa, which was 2 hours more than he'd expected. Victoria was asleep in the bed, finally having worked until somewhere past 3 before Diane had quietly closed her laptop and told her that exhausted thinking was worse than no thinking at all. Diane was already up again, standing by the window with a cup of bad hotel coffee, and she pointed at Ethan's phone when it buzzed. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. Tell me something useful, he said. Good morning to you, too. Danny sounded like he hadn't slept at all, which for Danny was probably normal. He'd always run on less sleep than any human being Ethan had ever met, operating in that narrow band between exhaustion and hyperfunction that some people found in combat and never quite left behind. Marcus Vale, 52, born in Hartford, Connecticut, MBA from Wharton, 1996. Spent his first 8 years in corporate restructuring before joining a man named Gerald Whitmore at a startup technology firm that would eventually become Whitmore Technologies. I know the biography, Ethan said. What do you have that I don't? Patience cross. The sound of papers. Vale has a financial advisor, which you already told me, Terrence Boyle. But what you didn't know is that Boyle has a third partner in his consulting firm, silent partner, not listed on any public documents. A woman named Carol Finch. She's a former SEC compliance officer. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Former. Left the SEC 11 years ago under circumstances that were described internally as a voluntary resignation, but that followed an investigation into document handling irregularities. Nothing was ever filed. She went private, attached herself to Boyle's operation, and has been there ever since. Danny let that land. You want to know why a former SEC compliance officer is useful to a man running a corporate fraud scheme? Because she knows exactly how to make fabricated documents look legitimate to an SEC review, Ethan said. She knows the format, the language, the filing protocols. She knows what reviewers look for and what they skip. That's the shape of it. She's the architect of the paperwork. Boyle handles the financial structure. Vale handles the target selection and the human element. Getting inside the company, building trust, accessing what he needs. Danny paused. And here's the part that's going to matter to your CEO friend. Arcturus Systems wasn't the first. There were 2 others before it, a biotech firm in San Diego 11 years ago and a logistics company in Atlanta 8 years ago. Both collapsed. Both CEOs eventually cleared, but too late to save their companies. And nothing was ever traced back to Marcus. Nothing public. But I talked to the Arcturus CEO this morning, a man named Philip Garrett. He's been working his case in civil court for 3 years, and he's got something interesting. A pattern analysis his attorney put together. The same law firm appeared in the document chain for all 3 previous cases. Firm called Desmond and Hale. They don't advertise. They're not listed in any directory. They exist on paper and they take on exactly this kind of work, creating legally formatted documentation that can withstand initial scrutiny long enough to do damage before the fraud is provable. Ethan leaned against the hallway wall. A hotel housekeeper pushed a cart past him and nodded. He nodded back. Desmond and Hale. Can Garrett share his attorney's analysis? Already asked. He will, on the condition that whatever you find gets shared with his legal team. He wants to be part of bringing this down. Fair, set it up. Ethan checked the time. What about the access logs, the document archive at Whitmore Technologies? That's not my lane. That's something you're going to have to pull from inside. We have someone on it. Then you've got a decent hand, Cross. Not a great one, but decent. Danny was quiet for a second. You need to be careful. If Vale is running this the way he ran the others, there's a timeline already in motion. The SEC tip goes public. The board gets spooked, and within 72 hours he files for emergency operational control on the grounds that the CEO is under federal scrutiny. It's all civil. No one gets arrested, no crime is technically committed in the first wave. The damage is done through process. So we have 72 hours. You had 72 hours starting last night. Do the math. Ethan did. He went back into the room. Victoria was awake. She'd pulled herself upright in the bed with the focused efficiency of someone who didn't have the option of easing into mornings, and she was looking at her phone, her real phone, which she'd turned back on, with an expression that said the news was already bad. Bloomberg published, she said before he could speak, 20 minutes ago. They're calling it an informal SEC inquiry. They've quoted 2 anonymous sources inside the company. He has people inside, Ethan said. We already assumed that. Assuming it and seeing it are different things. She set the phone face down on the blanket. What did Danny find? He told her. He watched her face as he talked, not for reaction, but because her reactions told him how much she already knew versus how much was new. The Carol Finch connection was new. He could see it in the slight tightening around her eyes. The Desmond and Hale firm. That was new too, and that one she filed away with the deliberate focus of someone who was going to come back to it. "Philip Garrett," she said when he finished. "I know that name. Not personally, but I followed the Arcturus case. He tried to go public with what had happened to him, and no one took it seriously because his company had already failed. The narrative was already set. His attorney has a pattern analysis. That's the connective tissue we need." She was already alert, the grogginess of 2 hours' sleep burned off by information. If we can show a documented pattern across 4 companies, the same methods, the same law firm, the same financial architecture, it changes the nature of the SC inquiry from a targeted investigation of me to a pattern of predatory fraud. She looked at Ethan. "That's not a defense. That's an offense." "Which is better," he said, significantly. She reached for Diane's laptop on the nightstand. "I need to call Sandra." Sandra had pulled the archive access logs overnight. She'd also, with the quiet thoroughness that had made Victoria hire her in the first place, cross-referenced the access timestamps against the company's internal calendar system. When Victoria put her on speaker and she started reading the results, the room got very still. The legal archive was accessed 6 times over an 18-month period by credentials that technically belonged to a man named Howard Park, Sandra said. Howard Park is listed as a senior legal advisor, but here's the thing. He retired 4 years ago. His credentials were supposed to be deactivated on his last day. "They weren't deactivated," Victoria said. "No, they were kept active. The deactivation request was submitted but never processed. I checked the IT records. The processing queue, it was cleared by someone in IT administration, but the specific clearance was done under a batch operation, which means it looks automatic. If you weren't looking for it specifically, you'd never catch it." Ethan said, "So someone engineered a ghost credential, a retired employee's access that should have been closed but wasn't, so that when Marcus needed to get into the archive, he could do it under a name that pointed nowhere." "That's what the records show," Sandra said. "But here's where it gets more specific. 2 of the 6 access events happened during business hours on days when I can correlate physical building access records. And the keycard swipes at the archive room door don't match Howard Park, obviously, because Howard Park hasn't been in the building in 4 years. The keycard entries show a different ID number." "Can you trace the keycard?" Victoria asked. "I did." A pause, the kind that meant what came next wasn't easy. "The keycard belongs to a man named Arthur Greer. He's the executive director of legal compliance. He's been with the company for 19 years. He was your father's closest advisor," Victoria said. Her voice didn't change. "I know who Arthur Greer is." The line was quiet for a moment. "Victoria," Sandra said carefully. "Keep going," Victoria said. That's essentially what I have. The keycard ties Greer to the archive access. The archive access ties directly to the documents Marcus had at the restaurant, based on the timestamps and the specific files in that section of the archive." Sandra exhaled. "I'm sorry, I know this is—" "It's information," Victoria said. "That's what I need. Thank you, Sandra. Don't go to the office today. Work from home and keep your phone on." She ended the call. The room held the specific quality of silence that follows something that can't be taken back. Diane was looking at her coffee cup. Ethan was looking at Victoria. Arthur Greer. 19 years. Her father's closest advisor. A man who had presumably been in her life since before she could form clear memories of it. A man who had been at her father's funeral and at board meetings and at the quiet internal moments that every company has when it's deciding what it actually is. "Tell me about him," Ethan said. Victoria was looking at the wall. Not the empty stare of someone who'd gone somewhere else, the focused inward look of someone who was reorganizing what they thought they knew. "He's 61. He was with the company before I was born. My father trusted him more than almost anyone. When my father died, Arthur—" She stopped. "He was one of the first people at the hospital. He sat with my mother for hours. He handled the legal transition of ownership so that the company transferred to me without— He made it clean. He protected my family." Or he made sure you were positioned the way Marcus needed you positioned, Ethan said quietly. She looked at him. I'm not saying that's what happened, he said. I'm saying it's a possibility we have to consider. I know. Her voice was controlled, too controlled, in the way of someone pressing hard against something they don't want to feel yet. If Arthur has been helping Marcus, if he's been helping him for years, she stopped again. My mother signed something, years ago. Marcus mentioned it last night at the restaurant, and I was focused on the immediate threat. He said she'd signed something that gave him access. He used a family secret as leverage. Ethan sat forward. What family secret? I don't know what he was referring to. My parents, their marriage was complicated. My father had a period before I was born where she looked down at her hands. There were things that weren't discussed, things my mother kept protected because she thought they needed to be protected. She looked up. If Marcus found something from that period and used it as leverage against my mother, and Arthur was the one who facilitated the access, then Arthur didn't just help Marcus, Ethan said. He used your mother's trust in him to do it. The weight of that settled in the room. I need to talk to my mother, Victoria said. Not yet, Ethan said. She looked at him. If Marcus has leverage over her through something she's kept private, and you go to her before you understand exactly what it is, she might close down, protect the secret instead of helping you. It has to be the right moment. Victoria's jaw worked for a second. You're right, she said, like it cost her something. I hate that you're right. It happens sometimes. She almost made a sound that might have been a short, tired exhale of something approaching humor. Does it? Occasionally. He stood up. We need to move today. Danny's getting us Garrett's attorney's pattern analysis. We need to get Sandra's documentation off-site to a location Marcus can't reach. And we need to find the Desmond and Hale connection. There has to be a physical record somewhere, a communication chain between Marcus and that firm. His phone, Victoria said, or his email. Not accessible to us without a warrant, and getting a warrant requires the SEC inquiry to move faster than Marcus wants it to. He thought for a moment. But Terrence Boyle might be different. Boyle is the financial architect. If Marcus is the face of this operation and Boyle is the structure, there's a version of this where Boyle knows the whole scope but doesn't necessarily share Marcus's risk tolerance. You think he's reachable? I think people who build financial structures for other people's crimes calculate odds for a living. And if the odds start shifting, Ethan shrugged. He might calculate that cooperation is better than exposure. Victoria was quiet for a moment. How would we even get to Boyle? Through Garrett's attorney. If Boyle has shown up in Garrett's case, there may already be a channel. And if there isn't, then we find another way. He looked at her directly. One thing at a time. Right now, breakfast. Then we move. Diane was already at her phone ordering room service, with the particular efficiency of a person who had decided that, whatever else was happening, the humans in the room needed to eat. The room service arrived in 35 minutes. Eggs, toast, coffee, that was meaningfully better than what the lobby machine produced. Ethan ate standing up, which was a habit he'd never managed to break. Victoria ate at the desk, working between bites, and Diane sat on the edge of the bed and ate like a person who was rationing her calm carefully. Danny sent the file from Garrett's attorney at 9:15. It was 47 pages, formatted with the particular density of legal documentation, footnotes, exhibit references, timeline charts. Ethan read it the way he'd been trained to read intelligence briefs. Start with the summary, identify the key claims, then go to the evidence that either supported or undermined them. Victoria read it differently. She read linearly from the first page, taking notes on a legal pad with a handwriting that was small and precise and slightly tilted. By 10:30, they had both reached the same conclusions independently, which Ethan thought was a good sign. Desmond and Hale filed documentation in all 4 cases, Victoria said, including Arcturus. Garrett's attorney found their fingerprints through a specific formatting anomaly, a particular way of structuring exhibit references in compliance filings that's slightly off standard. It's subtle enough that you wouldn't catch it unless you'd seen it before. His attorney caught it because she'd seen it once before, in the Atlanta logistics case. Which means she can testify to the pattern, Ethan said. If it goes to trial, yes, but we're not at trial. We're at the stage where Marcus is trying to make it look like I don't deserve to be in the room when decisions are made about my own company. She set down the legal pad. What we need is enough to make the SEC look at Marcus instead of me. Not proof of guilt, proof of reasonable doubt about the direction of their inquiry. Garrett's pattern analysis does that. Partially. It shows a pattern. It points at Desmond and Hale. But it doesn't directly connect Marcus Vail to the Whitmore Technologies filing because the SEC filing hasn't happened yet. He's still in the tip stage. We need to get ahead of it. She looked at her notes. If we can show that the Meridian accounts were created using my forged signature during a period when Arthur Greer accessed the archive, and that the same methodology was used in previous fraud cases linked to Desmond and Hale, we can present the SEC with a counter-narrative before Marcus's filing arrives. Can you put together that presentation? I can write it. I need an attorney to file it. What about your head of legal? Connor Walsh. He's on the list of people who might have been reached by Marcus. She looked at her hands briefly. He has access to things Marcus would want. Board communications, legal strategy documents. She paused. But Connor also has a brother-in-law who works at the SEC's enforcement division. If he's clean, if Marcus hasn't gotten to him, that connection is worth a lot. How do you read him? Your instinct? She thought about it honestly rather than quickly. I think he's scared, she said. I think Marcus may have approached him, and he didn't bite, but he also didn't tell me because he didn't know what to do with it. That would explain some things I've noticed over the last few weeks. He's been slightly less available, slightly more formal with me. Not guilty formal, scared formal. Then there's a version of this where he's been waiting for you to give him a reason to be on your side. Possibly. Call him, Ethan said. Not from a phone he can trace to you yet. From the prepaid. Tell him enough to know you're serious without giving him so much that he can use it if he decides to make a different choice. Victoria looked at the prepaid phone on the desk. She picked it up and held it for a moment, the way you hold something that represents a decision you've already made but haven't acted on yet. She dialed. Connor Walsh answered on the third ring. He was clearly at his desk. Ethan could hear the ambient sound of an office, keyboards, distant conversation. His voice, when he said hello, was cautious, in the specific way of a man who didn't recognize the number but had been waiting for an unusual call. Connor, Victoria said. It's me. A very short silence. Victoria. Not surprised exactly. Relieved, maybe, in a complicated way. Are you all right? I'm functional. I need to know something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Okay. Has Marcus Vail approached you, directly or through an intermediary? The silence this time was longer, long enough to be an answer. Connor. 3 weeks ago, he said. A man I didn't know came to my office. He said he represented certain interests within the company and that there was going to be a leadership transition. He told me that if I cooperated with the transition, my position would be secured. If I didn't cooperate, he stopped. He implied that certain communications of mine that were personal in nature would become relevant to my continued employment. Ethan watched Victoria close her eyes for 1 second, then open them. They threatened you, she said. I didn't tell you because I didn't know what was real and what wasn't, Connor said. I didn't know if this was a test. I didn't know if you were involved somehow. I know it doesn't sound like anything. You were scared and you froze, I understand. She looked at the legal pad in front of her. I need your help now. I need to know if you can be where I need you to be. Tell me what you need. Your brother-in-law at the SEC Enforcement Division. Can he receive a preemptive counterfiling off the normal intake channel directly to him so it lands on a desk before Marcus's filing reaches the standard processing queue? A pause. He's in the civil enforcement section. He could receive it. He'd have to decide what to do with it on his own authority, but... Connor was quiet for a moment. If what you're filing is what I think you're filing, he'd want to see it. It's going to include evidence of a documented fraud pattern across 4 companies, evidence that the documents being used against me were fabricated using forged credentials. And it's going to include a timeline that shows the inside access required to build that fabrication. Inside access, that Connor repeated. Carefully. Arthur Greer, Victoria said. Another silence, this one different. Not reluctant, but something that sounded like a piece of a puzzle someone had been holding wrong finally turning into the right orientation. I've had questions about Arthur for 2 years, Connor said quietly. Things that didn't add up. I filed them under the category of things I didn't want to be right about. I understand that feeling, Victoria said. Right now I need you to file them under the category of things that can help us. I'll call my brother-in-law in the next hour. Send me whatever you have through the secure external channel, not the company system. Use my personal email. He gave her the address. And Victoria, I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. Help me now, she said. That's the apology. She ended the call and set the phone down. Ethan had been quiet throughout. He'd watched her handle Connor with the precision of someone who understood that the right word at the right moment was the same as a key turning in a lock. You didn't force it. You found the angle. That was well done, he said. He was ready to be asked, she said. He just needed permission. Ethan thought about that, about how often the people who could help you were waiting for exactly that. Not persuasion, not argument, but someone willing to name the thing clearly enough that turning away from it became harder than moving toward it. His phone buzzed. Danny, Boyle has a problem, different from the one you're working. Financial exposure in a private equity deal gone bad, unrelated to Vail. He's illiquid and getting pressure from his investors. Someone in a worse position than Vail and looking for an exit. Thought you'd want to know the shape of his desperation. Ethan showed it to Victoria. She read it twice. Boyle is financially exposed and Marcus doesn't know. Probably. Which means Boyle's loyalty to Marcus has a price, and that price has gotten cheaper recently. She looked up. If we approach Boyle with what we know about his role, the financial architecture, Desmond and Hale, and we offer him cooperation in exchange for testimony, he might take it. He might also run straight to Marcus. Yes. She was thinking out loud now, working through it the way she probably worked through complex business decisions, not linearly, but in parallel, holding multiple possibilities at once. We need to approach him in a way that makes running to Marcus feel more dangerous than cooperating with us, which means we need him to understand that we already know enough that his cooperation is the only thing that changes his outcome. That requires a direct conversation, in person, somewhere he feels safe enough to hear it. Ethan thought. Do you know where he works out of? His firm has offices in the Meridian Tower downtown. 3rd floor. She paused. His name is on the Meridian subsidiary. That's where we found the first thread. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we need one more thing before we approach him. We need the full documentation package, Sandra's archive logs, Garrett's attorney's analysis, the Meridian account structure, in Connor's hands and filed with the SEC contact before we move on Boyle. If Boyle flinches and goes to Marcus, Marcus needs to already be looking at an incoming counterfiling that makes threatening us more costly than it's worth. Victoria looked at him. You're thinking about sequencing. I'm always thinking about sequencing. He met her eyes. You do one thing at a time. You make sure each move protects the next one. You don't confront Boyle until the filing is in. You don't go to your mother until you know exactly what leverage Marcus used. You don't go to Arthur Greer until you have enough that he can't simply deny it and make the denial stick. She was quiet for a moment. You think like an operation. That's how I think, he said. It wasn't an apology. I know. She looked at the legal pad covered in her small, tilted handwriting. Campbell. Can you give me 4 hours to draft the counterfiling? I can give you whatever you need. 4 hours, she said. Then we move. She turned to the desk and began to write. Not typing. Writing, longhand, the way some people think better than any other way. Ethan moved to the chair by the window and positioned himself where he could watch both the door and the street below, and he stayed there without needing to explain why. Diane cleared the breakfast things, refreshed the coffee, and set a glass of water at Victoria's elbow without being asked. She did all of this quietly, and with the efficiency of someone who understood that what was happening at that desk mattered, and that the best thing she could do was keep the space around it clear. Outside, the city moved through its mourning. People on their way to offices, delivery trucks, the ordinary machinery of commerce and movement that continued indifferent to whatever was happening in a fourth-floor hotel room. Somewhere across the city, Marcus Vale was beginning his day with the confidence of a man who had been 2 years in the building of something and believed the morning belonged to him. He wasn't wrong about the morning. But the morning was only one piece of a longer sequence, and Victoria Whitmore wrote with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the thing Marcus had spent 2 years constructing in secret could be dismantled, piece by piece, if you found the right place to start pulling. The archive logs. The ghost credential. The key card tied to Arthur Greer. The Desmond and Hale fingerprints across 4 cases. Boyle's financial desperation. Connor's brother-in-law at the SEC. Threads. All of them threads. And Victoria pulled each one onto the page with the handwriting of someone who had not given up, who had, in fact, never been closer to understanding exactly how this was going to end. Ethan watched the street and let her work, and the morning moved forward around them like a current they were finally learning to move with instead of against. The counterfiling took Victoria 3 hours and 40 minutes. When she was done, she had 41 pages of structured argument, exhibit references, and documented timeline that laid out, with the precision of someone who had spent 6 years running a company and 3 weeks quietly building a case, exactly what Marcus Vale had done and how he had done it. Sandra's archive logs, the keycard records tying Arthur Greer to the document access. The Meridian account structure cross-referenced against the forged signature timestamps. Garrett's attorney's pattern analysis, formatted as a supplemental exhibit, and a single paragraph at the end, written last, in the particular flat language of someone choosing restraint over anger, that named Desmond and Hale as a documented instrument of coordinated corporate fraud across 4 companies and requested that the SEC's inquiry be formally redirected. She read it back once, made 4 corrections, and handed it to Diane to transmit through the secure external channel to Connor Walsh's personal email. Then she sat back in her chair and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and looked at the ceiling. "It's good," Ethan said from the window. "You didn't read it." "I read enough." He moved from the window. "How are you?" It was a simple question, which was probably why it hit her the way it did. For the last 18 hours, they had been entirely inside the problem. The logistics of it, the sequencing, the construction of a defense that could hold. And no one had asked her that. She hadn't asked herself. "I'm angry," she said. "Not performing it, just reporting it, the way you report a weather condition. I'm angry in a way that feels very calm on the surface and very loud underneath, and I'm trying to make sure the loud part doesn't make the decisions. That's an accurate self-assessment. Don't compliment me on my self-assessment right now." "All right." She looked at him. He looked back at her without flinching, which she had noticed was one of his consistent qualities. He didn't look away from things that were uncomfortable, didn't shift or redirect or offer the kind of reassurance that was really just an attempt to end an awkward moment. He just stayed with it. "Arthur Greer has been at my family's side for 19 years, she said. "He was one of the first people who told me I could run that company. He sat across from me 2 weeks after my father's funeral and told me the board would come around, that the doubters would see what my father saw in me." She paused. I believed him. Not because I was naive, because I had no reason not to. "You still don't know the full shape of it," Ethan said. "Not yet. People can be loyal to one person and compromise toward another at the same time. It's not comfortable, but it's common." "Is that supposed to make it better?" "No, it's supposed to make it accurate." She looked at the wall for a moment. "We need to go to Boyle," she said, "before Marcus knows the filing is in motion." Connor had confirmed receipt of the package 40 minutes ago, and his brother-in-law at the SEC, a methodical man named David Osei, no relation to Patricia, which Victoria had confirmed with a short, humorless observation about coincidental names, had acknowledged it through a back channel and indicated it would be reviewed before the end of the business day. That was not a promise. It was better than nothing. "Boyle's office," Ethan said. "3rd floor of Meridian Tower. You know the building?" "I've been in it 2 years ago for a different meeting." She looked at him. "I'm going with you." He had expected this. "It might be better if, I'm going," she said again, with the quiet firmness of someone who had already considered and rejected the alternative. "Boyle needs to see me. Not a representative, not a document, not a message through an intermediary. He needs to see the person he helped set up sitting across from him and asking him to make a different choice. That's the pressure point." Ethan thought about it. She wasn't wrong. "We go in clean, no confrontation in the lobby, no scene. We request a meeting through the front desk and we wait for it. He'll try to refuse. Then you make sure he understands that refusing is the more expensive option." Ethan picked up his jacket. "Diane stays here." Diane, who had been listening from the bed while folding her second cup of coffee into something approaching a meal, looked up. "I was going to suggest that myself. Keep the documents. Keep Sandra's number accessible. If anything changes with the SEC contact, call immediately." "I know how to hold a position," Diane said, in the tone of someone who had been holding various positions for 4 years without adequate recognition. "I know you do." He looked at her directly. "You've been steady through all of this. That matters." Diane blinked, looked at Victoria. Victoria gave her a small nod. Diane set down her cup. "Go," she said. "I'll be here." Meridian Tower was a 40-story glass building in the financial district that had been built in the early part of the decade to signal a kind of aggressive optimism about the city's corporate future. The lobby had the cold, expensive quality of spaces designed to make visitors feel slightly underdressed. Ethan had been in places like it before. The aesthetic of power, the way it was manufactured through material and scale. He didn't find it impressive. He found it useful because spaces like this had predictable security arrangements, and predictable staff responses, and predictable sightlines, all of which he cataloged automatically and without effort as they crossed the lobby floor. Victoria's chair drew exactly the kind of glances it always drew in spaces like this. The quick, uncomfortable assessments of people deciding whether to acknowledge it. She moved through them without apparent notice, though Ethan suspected she noticed everything and had simply reached a point where these particular looks didn't cost her much anymore. At the reception desk, she asked for Terrence Boyle by name and said she was there on a matter related to Whitmore Technologies and that she believed Mr. Boyle would want to take the meeting. The receptionist, young, professionally pleasant, briefly thrown by the combination of Victoria's name and the specificity of the reference, made a call. A short conversation, too quiet to hear clearly. Then another call. Then she looked up with the expression of someone who had received confusing instructions and decided to follow them anyway. "Mr. Boyle will see you in conference room B, 3rd floor. Someone will escort you." Ethan and Victoria exchanged a look. That was faster than either of them had expected, which meant either Boyle was braver than anticipated or more frightened than Marcus knew. The conference room was small and had windows that looked out onto the side of an adjacent building. A view that said functional rather than prestigious. Boyle was already there when they were shown in. He was 60, heavy-set, with the kind of controlled stillness that comes from spending decades managing the physical expression of internal states he didn't want visible. He was wearing a tie that had been loosened slightly, and he looked like a man who had not slept particularly well. He looked at Victoria when she wheeled in, then at Ethan, then back at Victoria. "Ms. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Boyle." She positioned her chair across the conference table from him. Ethan stood near the door, not blocking it, just present. "Thank you for seeing us." "I almost didn't." He sat down. His hands were flat on the table, a deliberate stillness. "How did you find me?" "The same way I found everything else," Victoria said, carefully and methodically, over time. "The Meridian subsidiary list had your firm's incorporation address. The rest followed from there." Boyle was quiet for a moment. He had the expression of a man who was calculating and trying not to show it, which meant he was worse at not showing it than he thought. "I'm not sure what you believe I can offer you," he said. "I think you know exactly what you can offer me," Victoria said. "And I think you've been thinking about your options for the last few weeks, since Marcus's timeline started accelerating. Because you're a financial architect, Mr. Boyle, which means you understand exposure in a very specific way. And your exposure right now isn't just from what you built for Marcus." He looked at her carefully. "I don't know what you're referring to." "The Crestline Group," she said. The private equity position that's been underwater for 8 months. The investor calls you've been managing with decreasing success. The legal notice you received 11 days ago from one of your limited partners. Boyle's controlled stillness developed a small crack, a tightening around his eyes, just for a second. That's a separate matter. It's a separate matter that puts you in a very particular position, Victoria said. You're financially exposed in a way that makes a criminal indictment catastrophic in a way it might not otherwise be. A conviction, or even an extended investigation, ends your ability to operate in this industry permanently. And cooperation, on the other hand, Ms. Whitmore, his voice had an edge in it now. You're describing a negotiation that I'm not certain I'm in a position to have. You're in a better position to have it today than you will be tomorrow, she said. Because today, Marcus Vail still believes his filing is on track and that the SEC's attention is pointed at me. Tomorrow, or possibly later today, he's going to discover that a counter-filing has already been received by an enforcement officer and that the filing includes documented evidence of his pattern across 4 companies and that it names Desmond and Hale as a repeated instrument of that pattern. At that point, Marcus's priority will shift from completing his takeover to protecting himself. And the first thing he'll do to protect himself is calculate who he can offer to the SEC that's more useful than he is. She let that sit for a moment. You built the financial architecture, she said. You're more useful than he is. Boyle looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the wall with the expression of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and was now standing at the point where the weight of it had to go somewhere. Carol Finch put the documents together, he said. His voice was quieter now. The fabricated compliance filings. I built the account structures, but I didn't. The forgery side, the document construction, that was Carol's operation. I want that distinction on record. Then put it on record, Victoria said, formally, with your attorney present and a cooperation agreement in place. Marcus is going to be managing his own situation very shortly, Ethan said from the door. It was the first time he'd spoken. Boyle looked at him with the wary attention of someone who had been peripherally aware of him and was now deciding how much of a variable he represented. Whatever loyalty you think you owe him, understand that it isn't reciprocal. He'll give you up the moment it's useful. Boyle looked back at Victoria. You have a contact at the SEC. I have a filing already received, she said. A cooperation agreement gets your name to the right person before Marcus's filing reaches the standard queue. That timing matters. You know it matters. He was quiet for a long moment. Not the silence of someone stalling, the silence of someone landing on a decision they'd been approaching for weeks without quite reaching. I need my attorney present, he said. Call them, Victoria said. We'll wait. Chet. They waited in the hallway for 45 minutes while Boyle made calls behind the closed conference room door. Ethan got water from a cooler near the elevators. Victoria sat with her phone, her real phone back in service, reading the news cycle with the contained expression of someone watching their own building burn from across the street and planning the reconstruction. The Bloomberg story had developed through the morning. 2 follow-up pieces, both citing anonymous sources, both using the kind of language that was carefully calibrated to suggest guilt without stating it. Under scrutiny, questions about oversight, board members said to be concerned. One piece had a quote from an unnamed industry analyst describing Whitmore Technologies as a company facing a leadership credibility crisis. Victoria read it without visible reaction. Then she put her phone away. You want to say something, Ethan said. Many things, she said. I'm choosing not to. Good call. I've been making good calls since I was 24 years old, she said. That's not the problem. The problem is that good calls aren't always enough when someone else is willing to make very bad ones on your behalf without your knowledge. She looked at the conference room door. How long did you spend in environments where people made very bad calls on behalf of other people? Most of my adult life, he said, professionally speaking. Does it get easier? Understanding it? He thought about it honestly. You get better at seeing it coming. You don't get better at the part where it turns out to be someone you trusted. She nodded, once. No, I don't think you do. Boyle's attorney arrived 23 minutes later. A woman in her 50s named Grace Tanaka, sharp-faced, efficient, the kind of attorney who had stopped being impressed by most things sometime in her early 40s. She looked at Victoria, then at Ethan, then at Boyle's face when the conference room door opened, and apparently read the whole situation in about 4 seconds. "We need an hour," she said, "and I need the name of your SEC contact." Victoria gave her Connor's brother-in-law's direct line. Grace Tanaka looked at it, looked at Victoria, and went back into the conference room. Ethan leaned against the wall. "She'll get him there." "You think so?" "She's already decided this is the better outcome for her client. She's just making sure she controls the terms." 50 minutes later, they had a signed cooperation agreement, preliminary, pending formal documentation with the SEC. And Terrence Boyle had provided a 12-page summary of his role in the Marcus Vail operation, including the account structure, the names of the offshore entities, and the precise mechanism by which Carol Finch's fabricated documents had been formatted to pass initial SEC review. It wasn't everything, but it was a key turning in a lock. They were in the car heading back to the hotel when Victoria's phone rang. Not Diane, not Connor, not Sandra. The number on the screen was one she had apparently not expected, because she looked at it for a full 3 seconds before answering. "Mom," she said. Ethan kept his eyes on the street, but his attention shifted. Catherine Whitmore's voice was controlled in the way of a woman who had spent decades being controlled, who had raised control into a kind of art form. But underneath it was something that sounded like a current running very fast under ice. "I've been seeing the news," she said. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Catherine said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't because I thought I was protecting you, and I've been watching this morning's news and I understand now that I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself." Victoria was very still. "Tell me." A pause. The sound of a room, somewhere quiet, private, the kind of room a woman goes to when she needs to say something she's been carrying a long time. "Before you were born, your father made a mistake. Not the kind that ends a marriage, but the kind that a person with your grandfather's values would have used to end a career." Catherine's voice was measured, precise, the result of having rehearsed this or something close to it. "There was a woman. It wasn't an affair. It was one night at a conference in London. And your father told me about it 6 weeks later because he couldn't live with the silence. We went through 2 years of being very broken before we came back to each other." "Mom," Victoria said, "I know about Dad. I've known for years." Silence. "Diane found a reference to it in some of the old family documents 3 years ago and told me because she thought I should know," Victoria said. "I didn't bring it up because I didn't see what purpose it would serve." "Then you know. You knew what Marcus had." "I suspected after last night. He implied leverage. I put it together this morning." Victoria's voice was gentle in a way that it hadn't been with anyone else in the last 24 hours. "What did he ask you to sign?" Catherine exhaled. "It was 11 years ago. He came to me. Arthur brought him, which is why I didn't question it. Arthur had always been—" She stopped. Restarted. "He had a letter. He said it was a standard amendment to one of the company's partnership agreements. He said your father had intended to sign it before he became ill, and that it just needed a family representative to complete the record. I was still... Your father had only been gone 8 months. I wasn't reading legal documents carefully. I was barely reading anything." A pause. "And Arthur stood right there and told me it was routine." "What did it actually say?" Victoria asked. "I didn't understand what it said when I signed it. I had an attorney look at it 4 years ago. Not Arthur, someone I found on my own. And she told me it was a consent agreement that granted Marcus Vail the right to act as a co-executive authority in the event of a regulatory challenge to the company's primary leadership." Catherine's voice had the flatness of someone reporting something they've already cried about. She said it was structured in a way that would never hold up in court if challenged, but that it could be used to create the appearance of legitimate authority during a period of instability, long enough to do damage. Victoria was looking out the car window. "He's been carrying that document for 11 years, she said, waiting for the right moment to use it." "Yes." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I should have told you." "It was his fault, Mom, not yours." She said it evenly. "He used Arthur, and he used your grief, and he used a piece of paper your father never saw. That's not your fault." A beat. I need a copy of that document. Can your attorney send it to me directly? I'll call her in the next hour. And Mom, Victoria hesitated. Don't speak to Arthur Greer, not until you hear from me. If he calls, don't answer. A silence that said something had just confirmed a fear Catherine had been managing. How bad is it, with Arthur? I'll tell you everything when I can tell you in person, Victoria said. I promise. She ended the call and sat with the phone in her lap and looked out the window for a long moment. Ethan didn't say anything. He understood that some moments had a shape that words interrupted. After about a minute, she said, 11 years. He's been patient for 11 years. Patient people are dangerous, Ethan said, but they're also predictable. They commit to a plan and they stick to it, which means you can map the plan and find the edges of it. The consent document my mother signed, it's the last structural piece. If Marcus tries to use it to claim co-executive authority during the SEC inquiry, it looks legitimate on its surface, long enough to call a board session, long enough to put the vote to the people he's already worked. She turned from the window. We need Arthur. Arthur Greer. We need to confront him directly. Not through the SEC, not through Connor, not through documentation. We need him in a room. She looked at Ethan. He's going to be at the office today. He comes in by 8 and leaves at 6:30. 19 years, same schedule. If we walk into the building, Marcus might have someone watching. Not the main entrance. There's a side access through the parking structure that uses a key card system. My key card, my credentials. The elevator connects directly to the executive floor. She paused. Marcus doesn't have my key card. Does Arthur know you know about the archive access? No. Then he's not expecting you. No, she said again. He's going to come into that conversation thinking he has the upper hand because the news this morning says I'm under SEC scrutiny and he helped build the thing that put me there. She straightened in her seat. Let him think that for the first 5 minutes. Let him believe he's managing a difficult conversation with a CEO who doesn't know what he's done. And then I show him the keycard records, she said, and I watch him decide who he is. The executive floor of Whitmore Technologies was quieter than usual for a Thursday afternoon. The Bloomberg story had done what Bloomberg stories did, a low-grade anxiety that moved through corporate environments like weather, making people careful and slightly avoidant. 3 people passed them in the hallway after the elevator opened, and all 3 of them looked at Victoria with the particular combination of relief and discomfort of people who had been uncertain whether they'd see her today. She nodded at each of them, brief, direct. The nod of a person who is still in charge of the room she's standing in. Arthur Greer's office was at the end of the east corridor. The door was partially open. Ethan positioned himself in the hallway a few feet back, visible but not immediately aggressive, and Victoria knocked on the open door and went in. Arthur Greer was 61, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been pleasant for so long it had settled into permanent pleasantness as a default expression. He was at his desk with a pen in his hand and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and when he looked up and saw Victoria, his expression moved through 3 things very quickly: surprise, relief, something careful, before settling on concern. Victoria. He stood up. He always stood up. Another old courtesy, like Marcus, and she felt the parallel of it like a cold hand on the back of her neck. I've been trying to reach you since this morning. Are you all right? Sit down, Arthur. The news? I know what the news says. Sit down. He sat. He was still in the concerned expression, and it was a good one. Warm, a little worried, the face of a man who had spent decades being the person people brought their problems to. She had sat across from that face in some of the worst moments of her life and believed every time that it meant safety. She put the printed keycard records on the desk in front of him. He looked down at them. She watched his face. It took him about 4 seconds to understand what he was looking at. The pleasant expression didn't collapse. It was too well maintained for that. It shifted, subtly, into something more careful. His pen was still in his hand. These are building access records, he said, from the legal archive. Cross-referenced with the IT access logs from Howard Park's ghost credential. She kept her voice level. 6 access events over 18 months. Your key card at the archive door. Howard Park's credentials used to access the files. She paused. The files that Marcus Vale used to construct the fabricated documents he brought to Ardent 2 nights ago. Arthur set his pen down. The silence in the room was very different from the silences that had come before in this investigation. Those had been the silences of calculation, of people deciding how much to reveal. This one had the quality of something ending. "How long?" she said. He looked at her. For the first time in the conversation, maybe for the first time in a long time, his face was not performing anything. It was just the face of a 61-year-old man sitting inside a decision that had apparently grown into something much larger than he'd intended. 7 years, he said. The access itself. The agreement with Marcus goes back further. How much further? A pause. Before your father died. The room was very quiet. Outside the office window, the city moved in its afternoon way. Victoria sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the man who had been her father's closest friend and had stood at his funeral and had told her repeatedly that she had what it took. "My father knew?" she said. "No." Arthur's voice was, for the first time, unsteady. "Your father didn't know. Marcus approached me separately. There were things in the company's history, decisions your father made in the early years that weren't entirely clean. Not criminal, but the kind of thing that could be made to look worse than it was." He stopped. "He had enough to damage your father's legacy. I couldn't let that happen." "So you protected my father's reputation," she said, "by helping Marcus destroy mine." Arthur opened his mouth, closed it. "That's what happened," she said. "However you've framed it to yourself over the years, that's what happened. You protected him from a threat that wasn't real by making a real threat possible against me." She looked at him directly. "He manipulated you. He used your loyalty to my father as a lever, and you let him, because it was easier than looking at what you were actually agreeing to." "I didn't know how far he would take it," Arthur said. "In the beginning, I thought it was leverage. I thought he wanted a seat at the table, some influence over strategic decisions. I didn't understand. When did you understand?" He looked at the desk. "The Arcturus case," he said quietly. "When I saw what happened to Philip Garrett, I understood the pattern. I understood what I was part of. And you stayed. I didn't know how to undo it." He looked up at her. I know there's no way to make that acceptable, but I want you to understand that I have carried this every day for 3 years." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, not with the anger she'd been managing since the night before. That was still there, underneath, loud and controlled, the way she'd described it to Ethan, but with something more complicated than anger. The grief of finding out that betrayal doesn't always look like malice. Sometimes it looks like a frightened person making a series of small choices that become irreversible without them noticing. "I need you to write it down," she said. "Everything. The original approach from Marcus, the agreement, the archive access, what you knew about the Arcturus case, all of it. If I do that, you're in a better position than if you don't," she said. "Terrence Boyle cooperated this afternoon. Marcus's operation has more holes in it now than it did this morning. The only question is where you end up relative to those holes." She paused. "You helped build something that was used against 4 companies and 4 people who didn't deserve it. You can help tear it down. That doesn't erase anything, but it matters." Arthur was quiet for a long time. Ethan, in the hallway, didn't move. "Can I have tonight?" Arthur said finally. "To tell my family, before anything is filed." Victoria looked at him. It was a small thing to ask and a large thing to give, and they both knew it. "You have until 8 tomorrow morning," she said. "After that, I need the written statement delivered to Connor Walsh." She turned and wheeled out of the office. In the hallway, Ethan fell into step beside her chair, at the pace she was moving, without commentary or ceremony. They went back down the corridor toward the elevator, past the 3 people who looked at her with relief and discomfort and whatever else they were feeling, and Victoria moved through all of it without stopping. In the elevator, the doors closed, and she and Ethan were alone in the small, mirrored space of it for the 30 seconds it took to reach the parking level. "You gave him until morning," Ethan said. "Not a judgment, just an acknowledgement." "I know. That's a risk." "I know that too." She looked at her reflection in the elevator door. The CEO in the wheelchair, the woman who had built a company out of grief and determination and an absolute refusal to be defined by what she'd lost, looking at herself on a Thursday afternoon with the knowledge that the people she'd trusted most had been, some of them, the people she needed to be most afraid of. He's not going to run. He has nowhere to go that Marcus doesn't follow. She looked at Ethan's reflection beside hers. And I needed to give him the chance to do the right thing while he still has the choice. The elevator opened. They moved out into the concrete and fluorescent of the parking level, and the city was somewhere above and around them, indifferent and continuous. And two things were true simultaneously. The ground under Marcus Vale's plan was cracking in multiple places, and the night was not over yet. Victoria's phone buzzed. Connor Walsh. The SEC contact acknowledged the counterfiling, he said when she answered. They've opened a parallel inquiry. It's informal still, but it means Marcus's filing is going to land in a very different environment than he planned for. A pause. He's going to know something shifted, probably by tonight. I know, Victoria said. What do you want to do? She looked at Ethan. He was watching her in the way he'd been watching her since the alley behind Ardent. Not like someone waiting to act, but like someone who was ready to act the moment she named the direction. We find Marcus before he finds out how much we have, she said into the phone, and we end this where he can't run from it. She put the phone in her lap and looked at Ethan. Danny tracked Marcus to the Harrington Hotel this morning, Ethan said. He'd gotten the text while they were with Arthur, but had waited for the right moment. He's been there since last night, suite on the 14th floor. He has the original files, the folder from the restaurant, and two of his people with him. He's preparing to file, she said. He's preparing to finalize everything and move. If the SEC thing breaks in the news before he can complete the filing, he'll try to accelerate. Or he'll cut his losses and run. He has a private charter registered to a shell company, Victoria said, at an airfield 40 minutes from the city. She said it quietly, like something she'd known for a while and hadn't needed until now. I found it in the Meridian account records 2 weeks ago. I didn't understand what it was for at the time. Ethan was still. He built himself an exit, she said. He's always had one. Then we don't have until morning, Ethan said. We have until he hears the news. She nodded. Then we go tonight. They went to the Harrington Hotel at 9:15 that night. Danny had confirmed Marcus was still in the suite as of 8:40. One of his contacts in the city had eyes on the hotel entrance, and neither Marcus nor his two men had moved since early afternoon. That kind of stillness, Ethan knew, meant one of two things: a man who felt completely secure, or a man who was waiting for something. Given what was moving in the SEC's direction tonight, secure seemed less likely by the hour. Connor had called at 7 to say the parallel inquiry was now formally documented. Not public yet, but real, existing in the system in a way that couldn't be quietly withdrawn. David Osei had been thorough and fast, which Connor attributed to the fact that the pattern analysis from Garrett's attorney was exactly the kind of organized, cross-referenced documentation that enforcement officers dream about and rarely receive. 3 of the 4 prior cases. The same law firm fingerprint, the same financial architecture, the same methodology of forged access and fabricated compliance documents. Boyle's cooperation statement had arrived at 6. Grace Tanaka had been as efficient as she'd looked. Arthur Greer's written statement had arrived at 7:30, 3 hours before Victoria had given him until morning. It was 32 pages, handwritten first and then typed, and it was, in its way, the most complete document of everything Marcus Vale had built. Because Arthur had been inside it from the beginning and had the memory of a man carrying something heavy for a long time. People who carry things for a long time tend to remember them in detail. It's the weight that does it. Victoria read it in the car on the way to the Harrington. She didn't comment until she reached the last page. Then she closed the document on her laptop and looked out the window and said, "He apologized. At the end. 3 paragraphs. Does it help?" Ethan asked. She thought about it honestly, which he'd come to understand was how she did most things. "Not yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." The Harrington was a different kind of hotel than the one they'd spent the previous night in. The kind of place that had a concierge who knew regulars by name and a lobby that smelled like real flowers and leather. Marcus had been staying here for 2 days, which meant he'd planned the restaurant confrontation from a position of comfort, with a place to return to and regroup. That told you something about him. He expected things to go according to plan, and when they did, he liked to be comfortable. Ethan had spent time in environments where comfort was a liability. He didn't hold it against the people who'd never learned that, but he understood that it made them predictable in ways they didn't realize. They took the elevator to the 14th floor. Ethan had the room number from Danny, Suite 1412, end of the corridor. He also had a sense of the layout from the hotel's publicly available floor plan, which was enough. "You should wait here," he said, outside the elevator. "You keep saying that," Victoria said. "I keep meaning it. And I keep being the reason the conversation goes anywhere productive." She looked at him with the directness she'd had from the beginning. Not aggressive, just clear. "Marcus needs to see me, the same way Boyle needed to see me. There's a version of this where you go in first and it becomes physical and complicated and we lose the thread. And there's a version where I go in and Marcus has to sit across from the thing he tried to destroy and realize it's still sitting upright." Ethan looked at her for a moment. He thought about arguing and decided it would be a waste of time he didn't have. "Stay behind me until we know what's in the room," he said. "If either of his men moves toward you, you go back to the elevator and you don't wait for me." "Understood." "I mean that part." "I know you do." She held his gaze. "I also know you'll handle whatever needs handling before it gets that far." He wasn't sure if that was faith or pragmatism. With Victoria, the line between the two was narrow. They went down the corridor. Ethan knocked on the suite door the way he'd knocked on 100 doors in his previous life, with the specific, neutral authority of someone who had a reason to be there and wasn't hiding it. One of Marcus's men opened it, the larger one, the one who hadn't been at the restaurant and therefore didn't recognize Ethan on sight. He recognized Victoria. That half-second of recognition, the flicker of surprise, the recalibration, was enough. Ethan moved through the door before the man could decide what to do with what he was seeing, and the decision got made for him in the compact, efficient way that Ethan's decisions tended to get made. The man found himself against the wall of the suite's entryway with very little understanding of the sequence that had gotten him there. The second man was in the living area of the suite, standing, already moving when Ethan came through. He was faster than the first one, and he knew how to use his hands. And what followed was 20 seconds of the kind of work that looked like controlled chaos from the outside and felt, from inside it, like pure geometry, angles and weight, and the precise application of force to the exact points where a human body had no good answer. Ethan took a hit to the same spot on his ribs from the night before, which he registered and filed and would deal with later. When it was over, both men were on the floor. Nothing broken. Nobody shot. The room smelled like expensive hotel air freshener and the aftermath of fast movement. Marcus Vale was standing near the window on the far side of the suite's living room. He had been sitting at a desk, paper spread out, a laptop open, the evidence of a man in the middle of finalizing something. And he had stood when the noise started, and now he was standing very still with the expression of a man watching a plan come apart at a seam he hadn't accounted for. Victoria wheeled through the entryway and into the living area. Marcus looked at her. The stillness in his face shifted into something that wasn't quite fear. Marcus Vale was too controlled for fear, probably, or too practiced at not showing it, but was in the territory adjacent to it. The territory of a man who has spent 2 years building toward a specific outcome and is standing in the moment when the outcome clarifies into something other than what he expected. "Victoria," he said. "Marcus." She stopped in the middle of the room. Ethan positioned himself near the desk without approaching Marcus, close enough, ready, but letting the conversation have its space. "You should sit down." "I'll stand." He glanced at his two men on the floor, back at her. "How much do you have?" "More than enough," she said. "Boyle cooperated this afternoon. Arthur submitted a full written statement tonight. The SEC has a parallel inquiry with cross-reference documentation across 4 cases. The Desmond and Hale connection is documented. The archive access is documented. The consent document my mother signed 11 years ago has been reviewed by 3 attorneys, all of whom agree it would not survive a legal challenge for 48 hours. She paused. And Philip Garrett's attorney is prepared to file a civil suit that names you, Boyle, Carol Finch, and Arthur Greer as co-defendants in a coordinated fraud scheme affecting 4 companies over 11 years. Marcus was quiet. He looked at the papers spread on the desk, whatever he'd been finalizing, and then back at her. "The charter," he said. "You know about the airfield. I found it 2 weeks ago in the Meridian records. I didn't know what it was for then." She looked at him steadily. "I know what it's for now." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He sat down, not in defeat exactly, in the particular way of a man who has been standing for a very long time and has finally reached the moment where standing doesn't change anything. "You're better than I gave you credit for," he said, and he meant it, which was almost worse than if he hadn't. "You gave me 2 years of preparation time," she said. "I had 3 weeks. Imagine what I could have done with 2 years. Something moved through his expression. Not quite respect, not quite regret. Something between them that had no clean name. "What happens now?" he said. "Federal agents are going to arrive in about 20 minutes, she said. "I've had a line open to Connor's brother-in-law for the last hour. He's been listening." She looked at him. "Whatever you're planning to say in the next 20 minutes, say it knowing that." Marcus looked at Ethan. It was the first time he'd looked at him directly since they'd come through the door. He took in the jacket with the repair company logo, still there from the night before. The stillness of someone who had broken up what was in this room with considerably less effort than the situation probably warranted on paper. "Who are you?" Marcus said. "Nobody you planned for," Ethan said. "Former military?" It wasn't a question. "SEAL, I'd guess, from the way you move. You left it. Became a..." He glanced at the logo. "Repair technician. I fix things," Ethan said. "Yeah. And you got involved in this because I was in a restaurant and I saw something that needed to be handled." Ethan met his eyes. "That's the whole story." Marcus looked at him for another moment, then back at Victoria. "He's not what you think he is," Marcus said. "Men with that kind of training don't just walk away from it. Whatever he's told you about himself..." "He hasn't told me a great deal," Victoria said. "What he's done is more informative than what he's said." She looked at Marcus with the particular clarity of someone who has passed through anger and come out the other side into something cooler and more permanent. "You spent 2 years planning this because you thought I was the kind of person who could be defined by her vulnerabilities. The wheelchair, the grief, the trust I had in the people around me. You thought those things made me manageable." She paused. "You were wrong about all of it." Marcus looked at the desk again, at the papers, at the laptop that had whatever he'd been filing before they knocked. "The people whose companies you destroyed," she said, "Philip Garrett, the biotech CEO in San Diego, the logistics company in Atlanta, none of them did what you said they did." "No," he said, simply. "Did you think about them? While you were building this?" He was quiet for a moment. "I thought about outcomes," he said, "not about individuals." He looked up at her. "Which I understand is not an answer that means anything to you." "It means something," she said. "It tells me exactly what kind of person you are, which is useful information." The silence in the room had a different quality now, not tense, but settled. The quality of something that has been decided and is simply waiting for the formality of being completed. "I want to tell you something," Marcus said. He wasn't performing. His voice had dropped the controlled register it had carried at the restaurant and in every interaction Victoria had ever had with him, and what was underneath was just the voice of a man talking in a quiet room. "Your father was the best businessman I ever knew. Not because he was ruthless, because he understood what a company actually was. Not just a financial instrument, but a thing that had weight in people's lives. He believed that." He paused. "I stopped believing it somewhere along the way. I don't remember when. That's the honest answer." Victoria looked at him. She let the words be what they were. Not absolution, not explanation enough, but something real in a conversation that had been mostly constructed of carefully managed unreality. "I know he trusted you," she said. "I know it was real. Whatever happened to it later, I know it was real once. That landed somewhere in Marcus's face, quietly and without drama. 18 minutes later, federal agents knocked on the suite door. The arrest was exactly as undramatic as most consequential moments are when they finally arrive. Two agents, professional and quiet. Miranda rights read in the measured tone of people who have done this many times. Marcus went without resistance, in the way of a man who had calculated his options thoroughly enough to know that resistance was not among the viable ones. He looked at Victoria once as they led him out. She held his gaze and didn't look away. And then he was gone, and the suite was just a room with expensive furniture and papers on a desk, and the residual disorder of what Ethan had done to his two employees. Ethan sat down on the arm of a chair, his hand pressed lightly against his left side. "You're hurt," Victoria said. "Same rib. I'll ice it." "You said that last night." "And tonight I mean it more." He looked at her. She was in the middle of the room, hands in her lap, looking at the door through which Marcus had just gone. She looked for the first time since the restaurant 2 nights ago, like someone who had put down something very heavy and hadn't yet worked out what it felt like to have her hands free. "It's done," he said. "Most of it," she said. "There's still the board, the news cycle, the company to stabilize." She looked at her hands. "It's going to take months to fully repair." "Yes." "And Arthur, and whatever my mother is going to need when she understands the full shape of it." She exhaled. "And Philip Garrett. I should reach out to him. He spent 3 years alone with this." "He'll hear from someone by morning," Ethan said. "Danny's contact has his attorney's number. He won't be alone with it much longer." Victoria nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then, "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "What do you actually want, going forward? I'm not asking what you'll accept. I'm asking what you want." She looked at him with the directness that was simply her baseline. "Because people are going to offer you things in the next few weeks. I'm going to offer you things, and I want to know what you actually want before that starts. Because I think you'll say yes to the wrong things if someone doesn't ask you the right question first." Ethan looked at her. It was a good question. It was the kind of question that required an honest answer, and he sat with it for a moment the way he sat with most things that mattered, without rushing toward a resolution. "I want Maya to grow up knowing that her father didn't hide from hard things," he said. "I want to build something with my hands that matters, not a tactical operation, not an intelligence asset, something that actually helps people before they're in the situation you were in at that restaurant." He paused. "There are a lot of people who end up in versions of that situation, trapped, surrounded, depending on whoever happens to be in the corner booth." He looked at her. "Most corner booths are empty." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "A protection system," she said. "Not security in the traditional sense. Earlier intervention, before the restaurant, before the meeting." "Before the meeting," he agreed. "I know people who would fund that," she said, "not as a favor to you, as an investment in something that should exist." She held his eyes. "Not as your employer, as someone who believes in the idea." "There's a difference?" "There's a significant difference," she said. "I've had enough people around me who are employed by me. I want fewer of those and more people who are doing what they actually believe in." She paused. "The distinction matters." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk about it. When the dust settles." "When the dust settles," she agreed. "Us." The dust, as it turned out, took 4 months to settle. Not fully. Dust like this never fully settles. It just redistributes. But enough. The SEC's parallel inquiry became a formal investigation within 2 weeks of Marcus's arrest. Carol Finch was indicted 6 days after that, on the basis of Boyle's cooperation and the Desmond and Hale documentation that Garrett's attorney had spent 3 years assembling. Boyle himself received a cooperation agreement that reduced his exposure significantly, which Grace Tanaka described as the best possible outcome for someone in his position, and which Philip Garrett described more bluntly as less than he deserved, but more than nothing. Arthur Greer resigned from Whitmore Technologies the day after his written statement was submitted. He was not charged, ultimately. His cooperation was thorough and early enough, and the legal calculus of what he'd directly done versus what he'd enabled placed him in the complicated territory of accessory rather than architect. He sent Victoria a letter, handwritten, 3 weeks after his resignation. She read it once, put it in a drawer, and told Diane she'd decide later what to do with it. Some things needed more time than 4 months. The board of Whitmore Technologies convened an emergency session 10 days after the arrest. 3 of the 5 board members who Marcus had approached over the previous months came forward voluntarily and disclosed the nature of those approaches. 2 did not. They resigned before they could be asked. Patricia Ossie, with the calm authority of someone who had been waiting for years to stop managing her doubts about Marcus, helped restructure the board's composition and installed a new oversight committee focused specifically on executive accountability. Victoria was in every meeting, every session, every conversation that mattered. She was exhausted in a way that went to the bone by the end of the 2nd month. She told Diane this once at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in the office, and Diane looked at her and said, "I know, you're doing it anyway," which was not comforting in any conventional sense, but was entirely true and therefore more useful than comfort. Sandra Lim was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer. She accepted with the flat, satisfied expression of someone who had been doing the job for 2 years without the title. Connor Walsh stayed. He had moments of difficulty. The particular difficulty of a person living alongside a version of himself that had been afraid and frozen, which is a hard neighbor to have. But he was good at his work and got better at the rest. The company did not collapse. The stock dropped 14% in the 2 weeks after the Bloomberg story broke and recovered 11 points by the end of the 2nd month. Not fully, not yet, but the trajectory was clear to anyone who looked at the fundamentals rather than the noise. Victoria looked at the fundamentals. It was the thing she'd always been better at than most people around her. Ethan picked Maya up from school on a Wednesday in November, 4 months and 11 days after the night at Ardent, and brought her to meet Victoria at the restaurant where they'd agreed to have lunch. Not Ardent. A different place, smaller, with better coffee and a staff who did not have procedures for private dining alcoves. Maya was 9.5, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's nose, which Ethan had mentioned once, briefly, and not again. She walked into the restaurant with the alert, evaluating energy of a child who had learned to read rooms from a parent who read them professionally, and she looked at Victoria, the wheelchair, the composed face, the person who existed on the other side of everything her father had been part of over the last 4 months, with open, uncomplicated curiosity. "Dad said you run a company," Maya said, by way of introduction. "I do," Victoria said. "What kind?" "Technology, software mostly. Systems that help other companies run more efficiently." Maya considered this. "Dad fixes systems too," she said. "Different kind." "Yes," Victoria said, "different kind, but the same principle." She looked at the girl directly, the way she looked at everyone, without adjustment, without the softening people sometimes performed around children. "He's very good at it." "I know," Maya said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has never considered the alternative. Ethan sat down and looked at the two of them across the table, and felt something in his chest that didn't have a clean name, but that was in the vicinity of rightness, the specific, quiet quality of a moment being exactly what it should be. He had, in the 4 months since the night at the Harrington, fixed a total of 37 HVAC units, 2 commercial refrigeration systems, and 1 boiler that had been actively alarming for 3 years before anyone called him. He had also, in the hours outside that work, been building something with Danny Reyes and 2 other people he trusted from his previous life, a small operation that identified corporate targets before the predatory moves against them became irreversible. Not a security firm, not a law firm, something that existed in the space between intelligence and advocacy and the particular skill set of people who knew how to read a room before the room became a trap. Victoria had introduced him to 2 people who were interested in funding it. He had met with them once, with Danny present, and they would meet again in January. He wasn't in a hurry. He'd learned at some cost that the things worth building didn't benefit from being rushed. Over lunch, Maya asked Victoria about the wheelchair, directly, with the uncomplicated honesty of a child who had not yet learned to treat it as something that required careful navigation. Victoria answered directly, in kind, explaining what had happened with the same matter-of-fact clarity she brought to everything. "Does it hurt?" Maya asked. "Not anymore," Victoria said. "It did, for a long time. Then it just became part of how I move through the world." She paused. "Most things are like that, eventually." Maya thought about this seriously. "Dad has a scar on his arm," she said. "He says the same thing about it." Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked back at her with the slightly resigned expression of a parent who has accepted that his child will say true things at inopportune moments forever. "That sounds right," Victoria said. After lunch, they walked, Victoria's chair and Maya on foot, and Ethan with his hands in his jacket pockets, moving at the pace the three of them made naturally, which turned out to be unhurried and easy. It was a cold November afternoon, the kind that felt clean rather than bitter, and the city moved around them with its ordinary indifference to the particular significance of what was happening inside any given set of people walking through it. Maya ran ahead at one point, toward a vendor cart selling roasted nuts, and Ethan and Victoria moved at the same pace and were briefly alongside each other in the quiet way of people who had been through something and had reached the part afterward where the noise had finally thinned. "I went back to Ardent," Victoria said, "last week, by myself." He looked at her. "I wanted to see what it felt like." She watched Maya negotiate with the vendor, pointing at something with the confidence of a child who knows exactly what she wants. "It felt like a restaurant, that's all, just a place with tablecloths and a string quartet." She paused. "I sat at a table near the window and had coffee and read my emails, and no one bothered me." "Good," Ethan said. "It felt good," she said. "That's the thing I wanted to tell you. Not a lesson, I just wanted to say that it felt like reclaiming something, the ordinary version of a place that had been made into something else." She looked at him. "I think that's what you helped me do. Not save the company, not beat Marcus. That was the work, and I could have done most of that without you. What I couldn't have done was find my way back to believing the room was just a room." He thought about that, about what it cost a person to walk back into the place where they'd been the most vulnerable and find out it was just a room. It was a small thing that was not a small thing. "I had an easier version of the same problem," he said. "The life I left behind. The skills I didn't want to use anymore." He watched Maya return, pockets full of paper cones of roasted almonds, looking satisfied. "I'd been treating my own past like a room I shouldn't go back into. Turns out it's just a room." "Useful things in it," Victoria said. "Some of them," he agreed. Maya arrived and distributed almonds with the authority of someone who had designated herself in charge of this particular function, and the three of them stood on the sidewalk eating roasted almonds on a cold November afternoon, while the city did what the city always does, which is to say it moved forward without commentary, indifferent and continuous, making room for everything inside it, the way cities always have. There's a thing people say about rescue, that it happens in a moment, that it's clean and sudden and defined. A door opens. Someone pulls you out. You're safe, and the rescue is over. But the real thing, the thing that actually changes the shape of a life, almost never works that way. It happens over time, in the accumulated weight of small choices. The decision to stay in the corner booth instead of leaving, the decision to make one more call at 2 a.m, the decision to sit across from the person who betrayed you and give them until morning to tell the truth. It happens in the moment you go back to the room and find out it's just a room. In the moment you hand your child an almond cone and look across at someone who stood beside you through something that tried to take everything and realize that what you're standing in now is what was being fought for all along. Not a victory exactly, but a return. The ordinary life, reclaimed. Victoria Whitmore went back to work on a Monday morning in December and wheeled, into a building full of people who worked for her and trusted her and needed her to be what she was, which was not perfect and not invulnerable, but entirely stubbornly still there. Ethan Cross dropped Maya at school on the same Monday, watched her disappear through the front doors with her backpack and her roasted almond confidence, and drove to a small office he and Danny had rented in a building 3 blocks from the financial district to start building something that would try to make sure the next person trapped in the corner of a restaurant found their help before the curtain was drawn. He didn't know if it would work. Most things worth doing came without that guarantee. He thought it was worth doing anyway. That was enough to start.